So let's talk about what a function looks like in practice and just do a little bit of coding to get us warmed up today. So here is our guessing game, right? We import the random module up here at the top, and we create variables for the minimum and maximum numbers and the total number of guesses. And I'm just going to set that back to 10, and we'll give them 3 guesses. And here we have the computer creating a secret number. We welcome the user on line 11 here. And then we get into a loop that keeps track of how many guesses the user has. Now, in this version, we're not asking them if they want to play again at the end, but we can add that very easily. But the part that I want to focus on right here is this, where I'm asking for their input. Now, right now, you can see that I'm asking for their input, and I'm immediately converting it to an int. As we've talked about before, that's risky because it doesn't give me the chance to make sure that they actually put a number in their response. And if they don't, it's going to cause an error, and there's not really any space in here for me to like grab that or do something healthy to keep my program from crashing. So I don't want to do this. But if I start doing all of the error checking in this spot right here, in the middle of my code, in the middle of this loop, it's going to make my code and this whole loop pretty bulky and big and harder to follow. Because not only do I want to check if it's an integer, but I also want to check if it's in the range, right, between the minimum and maximum. So that's a lot of checking to do right here in the middle of this loop. It's an ideal spot for a custom function to be used. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a custom function where we do all of this work, and then I'm going to say int guess equals the return value of that custom function. And I'm going to take that function out, and this code won't get any longer, but it's going to be very useful all of a sudden and very powerful. So let's do this. As we think about where we want to put a custom function in our program, typically the flow of a program starts with whatever import statements you want to do. You always want to do those first. Those are always at the top of every Python program ever. I recommend that next you're setting up you might call them environment variables, you might call them settings, you might call them global variables. They're just the variables that are existing throughout your program that you want to start out with certain values in those variables. So I set those up next. And you can see the next line here, line 8, I'm jumping into the actual program, like the main part of the program, because I'm creating that secret number for the user or for the computer's secret number, right? So right here, before I start my main program, is where I want to define my function. If you remember, when I want to create a function, I start out with the keyword def for define. So I'm defining a function, and I'm going to call that function get guess. Okay? So far, so good. Do I need to have parameters? In this case, I am going to use parameters, and I'm going to use the parameters int min and int max. And I am actually going to call the parameters the same as my external variables. Now, that's a little risky because and the risk isn't that they're going to conflict with each other, because what happens inside the variable, this int min is only going to live inside this function. Outside the function, it's this. Inside the function, it's this. So the only risk here is that I'm confusing myself. But as long as I remember, and these are actually going to be the same as the ones that are outside. So it's really just making sure that this is a good black box function by passing those internally explicitly. So I'm passing the int min and int max. So I'm going to use those in my function. And I'm also going to make sure that I don't let the user out of this function until they give me what I want. They are going to give me a number or they're going to die trying, right? So in order to do that, I'm going to put everything in here in a while true loop, right? So the first thing I want to do is I want to ask them for their number. So I'm going to say str guess equals input, and this is going to be an F string, and I'm going to say give me a number between, and we're going to say int min and int max. Okay, so there's that, and we are going to strip that to make sure there's no white space, because what we need to do is we need to check and make sure that that's a numeric string, and if they have put a white space in there, that'll mess it up. So we want to strip any white space. Okay, the next thing we want to do is we want to find out if that's numeric. Since we're doing an integer, we don't have to worry about the decimal. The decimal is going to disqualify it, so we want an integer. So all we have to do is ask if it's numeric. So we're going to say if strGuess, I guess I'll put it in parentheses here, dot is numeric, then what are we going to do? If it's numeric, that's a good sign. I'm just going to put pass in there so I just hold my place for a minute, because right now I want to focus on what if it's not numeric. If it's not numeric, I'm going to give them the negative feedback. I'm going to say print you must enter a number be good if I spelled it right. There we go. Enter a number. And if it is numeric, that's good. Now, instead of pass, I'm going to get rid of that here, and I'm going to work on this branch of the code. And if it's numeric, that's a good sign. That means I can convert it to an integer. So I'm going to say int guess equals int str guess. Cool. Now I have an actual number. And what can I do with a number? I can compare it to other numbers to see if it's within my range. So now I need to compare it. I need to say if it's greater than or equal to this, and it's also less than or equal to this, then it's in my range, right? So if I'm, first thing I'm going to say is if int guess is less than or equal to int min, and int guess is greater than or equal to, no, I got that backwards, greater than or equal to the minimum and less than or equal to the int max. Okay, so it has to be both of those things. So what we're saying is if we've got like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we have the minimum and maximum, the user can guess 1 and 5. So we have to say greater than or equal to that, right? So that includes all of these, and also less than or equal to that, which includes all of these. So that makes sure that that number's in the range, which is good. That's what we want. If the number's in the range, then we're in good shape. And at that point, we will break out of the loop, but instead of using break, I'm going to use return, because return does the same thing as break in this scenario. Anytime inside a function, even if you're inside a loop, inside a loop, inside a loop, anytime you use return, it quits that function immediately, and whatever it's in. Does not matter, does not care. It is like, I'm out of here, and I'm taking the data with me. So we're returning the int guess. Okay, so that's good. If it's outside the range, then we're going to give them another message. Print, you need to enter a number between int min and int max. Okay, so there is, now that's a fair amount of code. It's not a ton of code, but it's a reasonably large amount of code. But it does several things for us, right? It gets the number, it sees if it's numeric, converts it, and makes sure that it's inside that thing, inside that range, that thing, inside the range. And so if I have this, now it's not going to let the user move on unless they give them what they want. And it's not, nothing the user can type now is going to generate an error. Now, we don't want to underestimate the power of our users to find something stupid to type in our programs and cause errors. They're wonderful at that. They're exceptional. But in this case, it's pretty good. So how do we use this now? How do we use this? Remember, we have to give it these two arguments to go into the parameters, the minimum and maximum, which is easy because we already have variables for those. And it's going to send back that value. It's going to give us the number that the user types in back. So we have to capture that. And where do we want to capture that? We want to capture that right here. So instead of this, we are going to put get guess. And then we're going to put int min and int max, which outside those are these two variables here. So I can zip this up by clicking this little minus sign next to it. I don't even need to see what's in there. It's a black box now. I know what it's going to, I know what it takes. I know the parameters it takes, and I know it's going to give me back an integer. Don't care how it works. Doesn't matter. So now I've got this really powerful function in my program, and my main program, the main part of my program here, has not gotten any more complicated than it was before. That's the power of functions, is it keeps your main part of your program relatively simple, and it puts all of the work elsewhere so that we can debug it easy, we can track what's going on, we can make modifications easily, all of that stuff. The other thing that's interesting is if I wanted to turn this into like a two-player game, where one person puts in a secret number and then another person puts in a secret number where they're trying to guess the first person's secret number. I can reuse this for both people because all it's saying is give me a number in this range, and it returns that into and puts it in the variable. So I could turn this into a two-player game, and I could have the same level of data checking or input checking for both players. So if I run this, let's give it a shot. So here's my guessing game. And notice if I type something that's not a number, I'm not using up my guesses here either. Like it's trapped, I'm trapped inside this function until I give it something valid. So if I give it 200, then it says you need to enter a number between 1 and 10. So it's giving me more intelligent feedback now. And if I say 5, okay, I guessed too low, and now it gives me, it says guess number 2 of 3, and I'm back in that function again. You can see I'm back in that loop. So I can type anything I want, and it's just going to keep me there until I give it another number. Okay, guessed right, second try. And so that's the elegance of a program that uses functions properly is really kind of a nice thing to look at. And that's, again, going back to that Zen of Python, keeping things simple by taking these functional chunks out of your main program and putting them into custom functions allows me to very easily reuse code. It allows me to type less code. It simplifies my main program so that I can focus on the flow of that program, right? Now, if I was going to create another custom function to even further simplify this program, it would be this piece right here, right? Because that's kind of big. I could just say, I could create one where I gave it the guess and the secret number, and it gives me feedback based on whether the user guessed too low, too high, or whatever. So that would be my next. And then if you can imagine, like, then my main program is literally like that big at that point. So there's a lot of ways you can simplify your programs by taking functions out. And that's ultimately where we're going to end up today as we talk about this stuff. So that's a really useful way of approaching functions.